Over the last 100 years, the skylines of major cities around the world have drastically changed with the construction of gigantic skyscrapers reaching towards the sky. Cities like New York, Dubai, Hong Kong, and Shanghai have been pioneers in this vertical construction phenomenon. However, in Europe, despite its cultural, historical, and economic wealth, most cities still maintain a low-profile skyline in terms of tall buildings. Why does Europe have fewer skyscrapers compared to other parts of the world? In this video, we will delve into the reasons behind this phenomenon, exploring historical, cultural, economic, and even political factors that explain the absence of large skyscrapers in the European continent. History and heritage protection. One of the most influential factors behind the absence of skyscrapers in Europe is the vast and rich architectural heritage of its cities. Europe is a continent deeply steeped in history. In cities like Rome, Paris, London, Madrid, and many others, the buildings are centuries old and serve as emblems of global cultural and architectural history. These are not just spaces for living or working, but monuments that reflect the passage of time, the different cultures that have occupied Europe, and the various artistic phases that have defined the continent. For this reason, many European countries have very strict laws regarding the preservation of their architectural heritage. In Paris, for example, authorities have imposed regulations that limit the height of buildings in the historic center to prevent modern high-rise constructions from interfering with the harmonious design of the city, its famous skyline, and landmarks like the Eiffel Tower. This idea of maintaining a visual connection to the past and preserving the urban style is very strong in many European capitals. In cities like London and Vienna, history plays a similar role. Urban planning is deeply influenced by the need to preserve entire neighborhoods of historical importance. In London, conservation laws require new buildings to be very respectful of their surroundings. The facades of buildings, even the most recent ones, must comply with a set of rules that preserve the traditional look of the city. The desire to protect heritage is not just an aesthetic issue, but also a deep value Europeans place on their history. This has resulted in a lower tolerance for vertical development, as there is a fear that skyscrapers could alter the historical character of the most emblematic neighborhoods. Urban density and horizontal expansion. A key difference between Europe and other parts of the world is the model of urban growth. While many cities in North America, Asia, and the Middle East have expanded primarily in height, many European cities have grown more horizontally. This phenomenon is closely related to how cities were structured in earlier times and the need to preserve living space in densely populated areas. European cities like Amsterdam, Madrid, or Berlin were built long before the concept of skyscrapers was even conceived. Therefore, their original designs did not contemplate vertical construction. The central areas of these cities are characterized by low-rise, multi-story buildings, but not skyscrapers. Additionally, in many European cities, there has been development in peripheral areas, which has allowed the population to spread more widely. The use of public transport, highly efficient in many of these cities, has made it possible for residents not to concentrate solely in the urban centers. Space is used more equitably, with low or medium-rise housing being built in the outskirts of major cities, while keeping the historic center free from large constructions. It is important to highlight that, despite the high population density in some European cities, the infrastructures that allow these cities to function efficiently do not necessarily depend on skyscrapers. The public transport system, for example, plays a crucial role in allowing people to move easily between urban and suburban areas without the need to concentrate in large towers. Cultural and aesthetic factors. Culture and aesthetic considerations play a significant role in how architecture is conceived in Europe. In many European cities, modern architecture, and especially skyscrapers, are seen as symbols of industrialization and the depersonalization of cities. For many Europeans, modernity is sometimes associated with the destruction of the traditional, and skyscrapers may be perceived as intruders that affect the visual quality and atmosphere of cities. European cities highly value the harmony between modern and historical architecture. For example, in cities like Florence or Prague, there is resistance to allowing new constructions to alter the visual identity of the city. In these places, tall buildings can be seen as disruptive elements that interrupt the perspective of the city and its landscape. On the other hand, the architectural style of European cities is very diverse, but always with an emphasis on the human scale and the relationship between the individual and the space. In cities like Paris, the tendency is to maintain an architectural scale that favors walkability, social interaction, and the integration of architecture into the natural and urban environment. Skyscrapers, due to their height and visual impact, are often seen as elements that disrupt that connection. Economy and profitability of skyscrapers. While skyscrapers can be a good source of income due to the density of people and businesses they can house, the profitability of these constructions is not always the same in Europe as in other parts of the world. In many European countries, the cost of land in urban centers is already so high that building a skyscraper is not always more profitable than other types of mid-rise buildings. The cost of constructing skyscrapers is considerably higher than that of low-rise buildings. Developers in Europe generally prefer projects that ensure short and medium-term profitability. Building upwards can be an economic challenge, as, in addition to construction costs, maintenance expenses, energy efficiency, and the need to comply with very strict urban regulations must also be taken into account. In contrast, in places like New York or Hong Kong, where land prices in the city center are so high that it becomes impossible to use the space efficiently without building upwards, skyscrapers are an economic necessity. In these cities, vertical construction becomes a way to maximize land use and generate income through rentals. Zoning regulations and resistance to skyscrapers. Strict zoning regulations also explain why skyscrapers are not common in many European cities. Land use regulations, designed to manage urban growth and protect the well-being of residents, often limit the construction of tall buildings. These regulations not only seek to preserve the landscape and aesthetics of cities, but also control population density and avoid overloading infrastructure, such as the transport system and public services. European cities tend to have a more balanced approach to urbanism, where the quality of life of residents is prioritized. Skyscrapers, while a solution in terms of space and efficiency, often generate resistance in the community due to their secondary effects. The construction of a skyscraper can increase traffic congestion, overload sewage systems, or affect access to natural light in nearby buildings. Public resistance is another crucial factor. In many places, local authorities face protests from citizens who fear that the construction of skyscrapers will negatively affect their daily lives. This has led to many high-rise projects being canceled or significantly modified to meet community expectations. The future of skyscrapers in Europe. Despite the historical, cultural, economic, and regulatory barriers that have limited the construction of skyscrapers in many European cities, the landscape is changing. In recent years, some metropolitan areas on the continent have started to adapt to the new needs of modern urbanization and the increasing pressure for efficient space usage in densely populated urban areas. Although Europe does not have the same number of skyscrapers as cities like New York, Shanghai, or Dubai, the future of large vertical constructions on the continent is taking shape in innovative and responsible ways.